everyone. So we're just going to give a minute or two for everyone to enter the virtual room, as it were, and we'll get started. Thanks. Everybody, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. This is our last session of the academic year, as it were, of the MENASP webinars. And I'm so pleased you've all joined us. I think we've saved the best till last, if I may say, and hopefully we'll go out with a very nice bang this afternoon on the really important topic of unemployment, particularly in relation to gender and youth in the MENA region. I'm Rana Jawad, the MENASP network convener, and just really want to thank you all for joining on behalf of myself and our colleagues, Miley Smorsink and Islam, who've helped organized this afternoon's webinar. So I'm really pleased to introduce a colleague who really needs no introduction. I think he's a teacher to us all who have been working on social protection issues in the MENA region, and he's certainly one of the first supporters of the network activities, and it's a real pleasure to have him here with us. So Dr Zafiris Tzannatos will be speaking about unemployment issues in the MENA region, and his title is Youth and Female Unemployment in MENA. It is more of an adult and male issue. And brief description of the talk is that unemployment in the region is universally attributed to age and gender factors, but he is going to tell us a bit more about the intricacies of this discussion and look as well at the international experiences and comparisons. And he has the benefit of having this long experience and this long background. Many of us will know that he is an economist. He is also now based in Jordan. And has had a very long career, very long experience at a range of organizations, including the World Bank. And he is currently based in the Jordan Strategy Forum and is also where he is a senior fellow. And he is also active with the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies in Lebanon, where he was previously a professor and chair of the economics department at the American University of Beirut. And as I've mentioned, has held a range of professional positions and been an advisor to several governments as well in the region on a range of issues, including conflict, development, industrialization, and transition as well to more democratic, hopefully, and developmental forms as well. So very pleased to join Zafiris. Thank you again. We will give the floor to him for about half an hour and then open up for questions in the chat or directly as well. Yeah, feel free everyone to intervene directly if you like. And I shall now mute myself. Thank you, Zafiris. Welcome, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Rana, and the network. It's a great honor to be with you, especially in this concluding session of the year. And I'm very pleased to see all of you, many of whom I know. And I want especially to acknowledge Mansour, who is a former student of mine, and he's at the ILO now. And just to tell him, I will make a lot of cryptic references to ILO, because I don't want to expose many things from the internal workings of the ILO, where I have been a member, but I will make an explicit reference to a positive thing that the ILO has made. So let me share the screen with you, and let me try to do it now. So it is a little bit not postmodernist or deconstruction of what we know already, but it is an addition to what we know. And let me start with this. The original title I had in this presentation was rather assertive. It was Unemployment is a Male and Adult Issue. But then I realized that as an economist, as you said, Rana, in economics, we always have two hands. So the long hand is that, yes, men and adults are the majority of the unemployed, but there is a short hand, and I had to acknowledge that. First, for professional integrity, we have two hands, and second, I could not kind of think of what can happen in the social media if I had a statement that unemployment is not a youth and gender issue, which is what everybody seems to be saying. So just as an introduction, let me say without attribution that the established narrative, and I stand to be corrected, is that the unemployment rates of the youth and women in the Arab countries, and not only, are more than double the unemployment rates of males and adults. That's correct. But from there, you will see consistently that there is a reference that the education system is of low quality, and the skills are not the ones that the labor market needs. And in fact, there's a very strong statement by Oxford that the Arab youth are unemployable. The low quality and the wrong skills are everywhere, in international organizations, in think tanks, in researchers, in donors, and I stand to be corrected. And if anybody has seen that this is not the first line of explanation, then I will be very happy to know about it. The second conclusion is that unemployment is due to cultural, social, and institutional factors. And I will argue that these factors are there as long as the economy is stale. When the economy changes, then all these things, the institutional things change. So what I will argue is that unemployment is mainly a macroeconomic issue, and the Arab economies have a big problem regarding economic growth due to the rentier practices that the countries, the governments are practicing. And I will argue that the Arabs do have skills, but there is no demand for skills. In fact, I cannot understand how we can say the Arabs are not motivated or are not skilled. I mean, come on. I mean, they're like any other group of people in the world. So my conclusion will be, if I don't get to the last slides, that don't blame the youth, the culture and norms, it is the economy, ... Now, I have ... because the word processor was telling me, do you want to use the word stupid? Of course, Clinton used this term, it is the economy stupid, but apparently a low-level individual like me, I mean, is not allowed to say that it is the economy stupid. The main problem is macroeconomic management and the absence of economic and political contestability. That's why we don't have competitive markets. And the third thing is, yes, there is progress in MENA, because people tell me, don't you see the good things that are happening? But in a globalizing world, it doesn't matter how fast you move, but how fast you move relatively to others. So this line of thought started in a joint paper with Mary Kawar when she was director of the ILO. And then she became Minister of International Cooperation and Planning in Jordan. And from her position, she realized that a lot is spent on active labor market programs and targeting the youth and women. It's kind of a darling topic for the donors. But at the same time, the impact was very small. It's certainly these measures, these policies helped those who were recipients of such support, but it didn't have any macroeconomic effects. Then it is this very good book by Hassan Hakimian, where I contributed a chapter, The Youth Bulge, the mismeasured, misunderstood, and mistreated Arab youth. And you see, I have an affection for the youth, being a professor all these years and my clients being young. And whether they are misunderstood or mistreated is a value judgment. It's an analytical conclusion. The mismeasured refer to a fact that the youth bulge in the Arab countries effectively was over before the Arab Spring. So after that, we cannot say that we have too many youth. And I wish we had. I mean, you see what happened in Europe and in America. We invite all refugees or asylum seekers or the immigrants because we have a population problem. And you see a lot of countries now are engaging in pronatalist policies because we don't have enough youth. And a lot of what I will say today comes from the Institute of the Mediterranean in Barcelona, where I contributed the blue parts of what you see on your screen. And I concentrated there on the Euromed countries of the Arab region. So my messages will be that unemployment rates are misleading, and let's look at the numbers of the unemployed and the composition of unemployment. As for employment, there is low demand for labor overall because the economy is not growing, and the labor demand for educational skills is absent. Why? Because the firms are labor intensive, low value added, low productivity, and there is no contestability. MENA has the the bigger average age of firms across different regions. And the final thing, which is, if you want, a hypothesis, is that cultures and social norms and patriarchy change after periods of sustained economic growth, and the Arab takeoff has yet to happen. So let's go back to the countries I had in the Euromed paper. And here I have 9 countries, and effectively this is MENA. Why? Because I have 9 countries, then we have 6 countries in the GCC in the Gulf, which have they are very high income, and they have totally distorted labor markets. And I think you had a seminar by Stephen Hertog some time ago and analyzed the markets in the GCC. So what's missing from these countries is the GCC and the sub-Saharan African countries. So effectively, when we're talking about MENA, this is where we have data and where the average is driven from. Now, again, let's look at the country average of female to male unemployment rates. And again, you can see that the female unemployment rates, like the youth unemployment rates, are more than double those of men. Now let's look at numbers and the composition. Yes. So if you look at numbers, most of the unemployed in the Arab region are adults and men. Let's look at adults. Now you see in the rest of the world, 65% of the unemployed are adults. In MENA, it's only 58%, but this is because the population is very young, but still 38%, the adults are 38% more than the youth. Now let's look at women, and this is even more impressive. Despite emphasizing the gender aspect of unemployment in the Arab regions, unemployed men are 62% more than unemployed women, while in the world it's only 57%. And in the 9 countries that I've studied, there are more than 2 million unemployed men than women, and 2 million more unemployed adults compared to youth. So the bulk of the unemployed is men and adults. So this effectively decides what kind of policies we should have eventually for addressing the unemployment problem. Now, there are also references that the unemployment is particularly an issue among young Arab women, and this is true because those who want to join, those women, young women who want to join the labor force in Arab countries are predominantly educated, university graduates. But let's compare them to South Europe, for example. In South Europe, the young women are 83% of the young men. And look now what's happening in MENA through different definitions of MENA. The ratio of young Arab women to young Arab men unemployed is much less. Also, I have this diagram to show you that when we refer to MENA, there are many different definitions of MENA. One is the MENA, as the World Bank defines it, and includes Iran, for example, which has a population of 100 million and changes the average. The other is the 22 Arab states. And when we go to the non-oil economies, that is the diversified, if you want, the real kind of economies in terms of textbook economics, the ratio of women to men, young women to young men, Arab men and women, is only 28%. So already you see here that irrespective of interpretation, the facts are not in line with a lot of the claims that are made. Now, I'm not using any attribution to what I say because I don't want to embarrass my colleagues having worked in the World Bank, the ILO, IMF, UNESCO, UNICEF, and the like. But look at how the thing is presented, okay? So this is the components of unemployment by gender. And we have that for women, 34% unemployed and available at short notice, okay? For men, it's 51%. The others, I don't know how to interpret them. The conventional definition of unemployment is the red. You are unemployed, you are available, and you are searching. The rest, I mean, are subject to interpretation. What does it mean that you are not available? I mean, when there is demand or supply, it depends today I want it, not at some point in the future whenever somebody wants to offer it. And this is a really misleading statement that I will use without attribution again, that 15% of working age women globally would like to work but do not have a job. Let me stop here first. Do not have a job. Not having a job may be because there is no work, there is no jobs to go, or you don't want to work. So this is leaving this kind of issue a little bit hanging. And this is 15% compared to 10%. First, the difference is rather small. But globally, 50% of women of working age work and 80% of men. So the 15% for women comes from the 50% of women who do not have a job, while the 10% comes from the 20% that is left after 80 men have worked. So the 10% is a really big number because you have only, this 10% comes only of a potential 20%. So you can see here that there can be facts, and the facts are presented in a way that really lead to, if I can say, impressionistic conclusions, which do not then help policymakers to have the right kind of policies. Now, what's the role of production in relationship to reproduction? I mean, what humans and all animals do is they produce and reproduce. If you don't produce today, you die. If you don't reproduce, you die tomorrow. There will be no race tomorrow. And these two are what they call it, the communicating vessels in Torricelli's kind of concept. And if you have a difference in one, you will have a difference in the other. And I will come back to this on whether we can ever have 100% equality in any measure in the labor market. I want to go a little bit off script here and to show you this graph. This graph is up to 2011, the Arab Spring. I have it for later, but for the Arab region, this graph is distorted. Why? Because we had the financial crisis, we have the Arab Spring, we had the Syrian refugees, we had the Corona and all these things. While stopping at 2011 gives us some insight about the Arab Spring. And and comes after 20 years of rather consistent and stable economic growth of whatever level it was in the Arab region. On the horizontal side, on the horizontal axis, I have the Voice and Accountability Index that was developed in part by an old colleague of the World Bank, Kaufman, and it is a measure of democracy. On the vertical axis, I have GDP growth. And it is GDP growth that matters, not the level, because people are driven by how much they had last year and how much they have this year. If things are improving, then things are okay. People don't go to the street. So somebody saw it, in fact, a very senior member of the UN agency, he told me, so there is a negative relationship between democracy and economic growth. And he missed the point that this is not a static relationship, but it reflects the developmental stage of the country. What does this mean? I mean, let's see this one. You see, China is on the far left, okay? Very little kind of voice accountability, while all the other countries on the right are the most advanced democracies. Now, these democracies have very high income. They cannot grow fast. If those who have high income grow faster, then we will end up in the sky, and while the other countries will perish. It is like tall parents having shorter children and short parents having taller children. This is regression towards the mean, as we say in economics. So this explains this pattern. Now, what is here for the Arab region? Let's partition it into this group of countries. So the point of this graph is that all Arab countries are in the wrong quadrant. They are in the bottom left. These are the countries that are marked within a box. Even more interesting is the fact that the countries to the left of the green line are which ones? Tunisia, that blew up first, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, Libya. Only Saudi Arabia escaped the crisis from the Arab Spring. So you can see here we have both economic and political issues in the Arab region, and the two have to be tackled together. You cannot just focus on one group of people or workers or whatever, but we are dealing with a systemic issue in the Arab region. So just one of the many graphs I'm using is the Global Innovation Index in the countries that I have studied, and all of them, as you can see, are below the median country. So they are perform worse. They are in the bottom half of the countries that are innovating. And if I can take a specific country, I will not name it, look what's happening to it. Total factor productivity has been, and labor productivity has been declining. Economic complexity that is moving towards low value added production has collapsed. And what is important is not here the score, it is the rank. It's losing out another in the global kind of rankings, and other countries are moving faster. Global Innovation Index has collapsed. How will this be corrected? Through investment. But you see, investment is going down, so there are no drivers of growth. And of course, who would invest in this country if economic freedom is going down and the rule of law is going down? So you can see here we have systemic issues, and this is why I say unemployment and employment creation is a macroeconomic issue. And then you can have frictional unemployment, seasonal unemployment, or whatever kind of unemployment you may want to consider. So let me come to the last part of my presentation. I mean, can there ever be equality in production if there is inequality in reproduction? Well, this is, say, production, and this is reproduction. But between the two now, we have all these cultural and social issues that have come from thousands of years of evolution of the human race. I mean, institutions don't come for nothing, but they serve the purpose in the last 100,000 years, and the human race is still alive. So these factors have created this inequality in production. Now, these factors are coming down, and the question is, will we ever end up in this kind of equality, 100% a la Torricelli, if you want, something we learn in physics in school. Let's go to the country that has studied a lot the issue of gender inequality. And Francine Blau is a flagship of feminist economists in the US. And she examined the adjusted and unadjusted wage gap in the United States. Unadjusted means what is the difference, the gross difference between wages of men and women, okay? And you can see here something that is said consistently. Yes, progress has been made, but it is not fast enough, and the difference is still big. What is kind of disturbing is that the adjusted wage is not only constant, but slightly increasing. What adjusted means? Adjusted means that women and men are different on the labor supply side. They have different preferences. They have different choices. Maternity is a big thing that changes, women's behavior towards work. Women work fewer hours. Women have less experience. Why? Because the participation rate increased recently, so women are younger in the labor market than men. So once you adjust for that, you have an 8% difference. So even if there is full equality on the demand side and on institutions, at this point, we will have to observe there will be an 8% difference in wages. So will the progress continue? Well, the ILO in 2019 said that in the countries, the most advanced countries, already female labor force participation has reached its peak, which means female labor force participation will be in the future lower than that of men. And this then will have a ripple effect on equality in the labor market. Okay, now a big question is, if inefficiencies are great in the labor market, somehow through rationality and competitions, they will be corrected. And in fact, according to these studies, you will see that we have huge inefficiencies or huge inequality in the labor market. And the question is, why doesn't the labor market and the economy address it? For example, Kuberes and Tenier says that the income losses are 27% in MENA compared to 15% of the rest of the world. And this is fine, yes, because the education gap, the work gap is big, the wages are big. So if we say, what if women were paid as men and there were as many of them working as men, then we will have 27% increase in MENA compared to 15% of the world. Then the IMF came with an even more impressive kind of statistic that we are losing 53% of GDP because of gender inequality. And then UN Women came that will take 300 years to close the global gender gap. Let me start with the last. I will say it will never, the gender gap will never be closed, to start with. Second, with respect with the previous 2 points that the losses are so big, and there is a question. I mean, if you go and tell the minister, look, you can increase GDP by 27% or 53%, he will jump off his chair. Yes, that's what I want to do. Why? Because even if I increase investment by 10%, 20%, 30%, right, on the capital output ratio, if I can use this term, the growth will be 2%, 3%, 4%. Here I have 53%. Why don't I do it? And here I have to revert to my own work that I did for the World Bank with regard to the MDG 13. That was the original MDG Millennium Development Goal introduced in 2000 with respect to gender equality. Now we have the SDGs. We realized we didn't do much by 2015, so we pushed the target to SDGs by 2030. And this is a much more realistic assessment of the situation. I take the labor force as given, I take the capital stock as given, and I say, let's assume there is total equality in between men and women with respect to wages, and men and women have the same exact distribution of employment. I mean, this is realistic because it uses the constraints in the economy, total employment, how much demand you have there, how many jobs you have, and also the capital stock. And there I find that the increase will be 2 to 6% one-off. So it will shift a GDP in 1 year, and then you go to the normal course of development. And I stand by that, not because it's published by the World Bank, but because of the analysis I have. And I can provide all the references I'm using after the seminar. So let me go to the last slide, which are the policy issues. Yes, we can have all these active labor market policies and we can target the youth and women, but the effect will be very small. What is needed is a new social contract, the one that failed to emerge after the Arab Spring. So the new social contract should eliminate the power of the insider elites to control the economy and appropriate the spoils of the war today as they have done in the past. And this calls for inclusiveness and equality in the private sector. And we need to have competition, contestability, diversification, and digitalization, which are in short supply. Why they are in short supply? Because if they come into the market, it will destroy the power base of the elites. And this is the big question now. Who will put the bell around the cat's neck? Can there be economic contestability without political contestability? In general, no, but yes, it can happen. It has happened, actually, at least in one country, where the leaders, although they are not contestable, they got their economics right. And this is Singapore. Now, I can mention others, but there the situation is less clear. I think I finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zafiris. Thought-provoking, and I know I have lots of questions, so thank you so much. Very interesting. Okay, so colleagues, time to ask questions, give comments. You can use the chat box. You can put your hand up. it'd be nice if you can put your videos on as well, so we make this a bit more personal if we can. So over to your questions, please, and comments. Oh, I think I saw a hand up. Hi, Khalid. Thank you. I think you've got your hand up, so please feel free to make your comment.
Hi, Rana. Zafiris, I can see a lot of friends also in the audience. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Zafiris. It's really a pleasure listening to you. And of course, very familiar with Zafiris's work. We worked together on, I think, was it in 2012, the ILO UNDP report, in which we were debunking some of these myths. Many of them have been reviewed today. But essentially, the argument hasn't changed. The argument is that in the MENA, you have a failure of structural transformation. And that failure of structural transformation is due to the fact that you don't have a developmental state. You have a rentier state, in a way. Okay, these arguments, one can go back and question over time. Now that we're 13 years after the Arab Spring, the pertinent question is, what has changed? And that's the question I want to ask Zafiris. Okay, so these stylized facts remain the same, but 13 years after the spring, really, what has changed, and which direction do we take? I just shared with you, Zafiris, and this is a follow-up question, a brief note that I wrote, in which I'm also trying to debunk one of the what I would say also other myths that are roaming around in the literature. And that's basically that we have small-sized public sectors in the Arab region. Well, as a matter of fact, and this is, of course, relevant to the question at hand, as a matter of fact, when you control for using the total population rather than the size of the labor force as your denominator, you realize that most Arab countries don't have larger public sectors. They, in fact, have smaller than the average. And the other thing is, when you account for the quality of governance or the government effectiveness as a discount variable, so you adjust this quantitative measure by measure of quality, you realize that they carry the double burden of having smaller and far less efficient public sectors. So contrast that, and that's my second follow-up question, with the enormous development challenges facing Arab countries today. And then the question is, you don't have structural transformation, you have all of these myths that you need to debunk, and yet there's no clarity in terms of which direction do we take. So two questions, Zafiris, where are we today compared to the, where we were 13 years ago? And what do we do, especially in light of these public sectors that are very weak and very inefficient, given these enormous levels of development challenges? Thank you, Rana, and great listening to you again, Zafiris.
Thank you, Khalid. Yeah, Zafiris, do you want to take each question at a time? Although you've got two questions to begin with.
I see a lot of hands, so if I start answering, I think will not do justice to the others. So
okay,
let's hear them, and some of them may be common also.
Fine.
So
let's take three at a time.
Yes.
Okay, so let's take three at a time, if that's all right. So next question from Jason, please, and then from Mr. Ibrahim. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. A quick question, really. I'd like some clarity on how you're using the term youth. It's a very ambiguous category in my experience, and could include young people under the age of 18 who in the MENA region are being targeted by organizations such as UNICEF and others to try and prevent them from entering the labor market or to remove them from the labor market because they're seen as vulnerable, being under 18 and working in some capacity. It also, I'm a little confused about the use of youth also because how closely can we map it onto or talk about it in the same terms as we talk about gender, where we have a clear kind of dichotomy of more or less 50-50% in terms of the total adult population, roughly speaking. But of course, with youth, we don't have that, where there is no kind of comparable dichotomy that can be made. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Ibrahim?
Thank you. Most interesting perspective. I just wanted to maybe push the issue a little bit further by bringing in the emerging kind of pessimistic kind of expectation that actually with under the digitech economy, growth, might actually be, difficult to come by. But even then, even if growth is achieved, it's not, especially in manufacturing, is not likely to be job creating, kind of instrument as before, which actually suggests that the social agenda and growth agenda should be integrated. That it's difficult to think about the growth agenda without the social agenda, which I think is very relevant to this presentation. But I would like actually, to push the matter further in terms of the instruments that are available to countries like South Asian countries in Latin America, like Chile, which is basically the exchange rate. When the economy is not sufficiently modernized, many successful countries have effectively used the instrument of the exchange rate in order to impart competitiveness, macroeconomic competitiveness of the economy, open new markets, and expand employment in the tradable economic activities. It seems like in the Arab world, both energy importing and energy exporting countries, the exchange rate is an instrument of sovereignty or sign of sovereignty. And the agro-industrial lobby seems to be quite limited in the context for resources and for policies and so on, which I think is an issue that it's not just a question of the type of the private sector that is closer to the governments and protected and what have you. I think it also goes to the type of macroeconomic policies adopted by most Arab countries. So the question becomes why this particular feature is found in the Arab countries and not elsewhere. And what are the political economic considerations that make it so hard for the society to accept that the exchange rate is an instrument of policy? It's not really a sign of sovereignty, like the flag or the army or so on. I think this is a fundamental question related to the macroeconomic approach to addressing the issue of unemployment and social agenda and growth in general. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay, Zafiris, you happy to respond to these first questions for now?
I can respond. I don't know whether I'm happy with the issues that they were raised, especially from Ibrahim, which I'm very glad to see that he arrived in Washington after a red-eye flight. I understand, and he's still up at 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, let's start with Ibrahim then. And of course, he has done a lot of work on military spending, I think, in the Arab region. And this is one factor. Now, whether it is for geopolitics or for the army to control the people politically or for economic interests, and in some countries, the army is very present in economic activities, I do not know. I would agree with him that yes, the economic and social agenda should be seen together. And he has, of course, much more experience internationally than me. I mean, for me, LAC and Latin America and the MENA region are really different. Let me give you an example from my own research and gender. In the late 1980s, I did a study on the female labor force participation in the world. And of course, it was regressions of data. On the right-hand side, I had a lot of things that would be there. Share of labor force in agriculture, education levels, and this kind of stuff. And then I included one variable, which was religion, which was the dominant religion of the country. And guess what? Most of the variation in the difference in the labor force participation rates across countries was due to religion, and most of it was coming from two religions. One was Islam, and the other was Catholicism. At the time, of course, in the 1980s, we had not only Latin America that was driving the results, we had Ireland, we had Italy that was doing the trick, and of course, we had the Muslim countries. I did the same regression more recently, and guess what? Catholicism has disappeared. So while Islam comes as a kind of force in determining, appearing in this kind of regression analysis, assuming it is independent, but then I work with the Shakti one, and we found that Islam is not one Islam. It's a different Islam in East Asia, Indonesia, for example, compared to the MENA countries in the north of Africa and the others in the Middle East, the GCC, Iraq, and Jordan and Palestine and the like. So Latin America has somehow first much more widespread voice and accountability over the years. And this is my thesis, that culture changes when the economy changes. Latin America had faster economic growth. The penalty there was they had very volatile economic growth. They had a lot of up and downs, while somehow the MENA model is stability and low growth. And this has to do with so many different things in politics and geopolitics also, that require kind of some explanation. But my thesis is I don't differentiate the Arab youth of Arab women as being anything different than the women and youth in other parts of the world. I mean, I'm not an expert on anthropology and sociology, but it's not what you call it, a maintained hypothesis that I use myself. It's like, I mean, do you believe that people are innately bad or they are created by the environment? What's the difference between nature and nurture? So my hypothesis here is there's nothing different when it comes to economics and incentives in the Arab world that it's not in other parts of the world. And you can see that by how different regions change and how, I mean, they open up on issues on gender, for example. I mean, what we have in gender, not only in Western countries, but also in Asian countries and even conservative countries of different parts of the world has changed completely. So this is with respect to answering a few of what Ibrahim asked. Now, on the issue of manufacturing, yes, one goes to Roderick somehow, that premature deindustrialization. We know in the 50s and 60s, MENA was doing very well, actually. I did a study on TFP, and up until the 1960s, the TFP in the Arab countries was much higher than in East Asia. And the problem is not that East Asia grew faster than TFP was increasing in the MENA region, but the collapse of TFP, total factor productivity in the Arab region. So the mystery is the collapse, or mystery, or something that is responsible for what we see today is the collapse of total factor productivity in the MENA region after the 1960s. Now, going backwards, Jason's point, yes, I use the 15 to 24, and I always say that this group is an extremely heterogeneous group. But consistently, all the studies I used are 15 to 24. I mean, there are some national statistics in other countries, they go up to 30. And let me tell you here a joke. When I was in a post-conflict country, they had defined the youth as up until the age of 39. And I said, guys, why are these there? I mean, above the age of 30, okay, 25 to 30, but 39. And they told me, look, these are fighters that we have to reward them. And all the donor money that come is for youth programs. So by expanding the definition of the youth till the age of 39, we can give them the benefits. So first, yes, it's always 15 to 24. And let's accept that a lot of them are in school and go to university. A lot of them have dropped out. And it will be very good, I mean, in future analysis, and I've done it also with Khaled Abu Ismail in our joint research, that we excluded from the measures of labor force participation rate the students. When we say that that many 15 to 65 of working age are in the labor force, we forget the students. If you're in the students, it's a good thing. So you may have a very low labor force participation rate because you have too many students. Great. So I agree. Yes, we need to standardize the 15 to 24 to those up to 15 to 18, those who continue to university, and all others. Now, going to Khaled, yes, Khaled, I didn't acknowledge our joint work because out of modesty. I didn't, then I will have to give exact references to some of the negative things I said. So indeed, we have done very good work, if I may say so, recognizing that modesty is the virtue you lose when you realize you have it. You mentioned something, and Ibrahim was there last week in Cairo, when there were still very senior researchers saying that unemployment is because the public sector is very high. The public sector employment is a big share of the labor force. And a lot of people have missed that the public sector has shrunk. Some say that now female unemployment is very high because women cannot be absorbed in the public sector, which I do not really, I have to see the data to agree to that. But it's true, that's another issue that we keep repeating in kind of group thinking, that the public sector is very bad. Now, let me come to an issue I did not really cover, and there is no demand for skills in the MENA region. Now, of course, there is no demand. If there is low value added, low wage employment, then the skills become a luxury. Why should I, as an employer, pay high wages for skills that I'm not going to use? The production technique is very labor intensive and rudimentary. They don't have skills, the Arabs, or are they different? Let me tell you this. The Arab region has one of the highest skilled immigration rates in the world. In Jordan, for example, if you take the domestic private sector and the diaspora of Jordanians working abroad, the diaspora is half the size of the domestic private sector. So half of the Jordanians who could have worked in the private sector are abroad. They have skills. And they have skills. They don't go, say, to Africa to work there. They go to the Gulf. They go to Western Europe. They go to Australia. They go to Canada. They go to the US. They go to countries that have very sophisticated modes of production, and they require high skills. So what's the problem? There is no demand for skills here. Why there is no demand for skills? Because the structure of the economy is rentier. It's not competitive. And I mentioned the fact, which comes from a lot of studies, including from Roberta Gatti's shop in the World Bank, that what I was saying, I lost my the fact there. Anyway, it will come back. Let me not continue. If it comes back, I will tell you.
Can I ask you a question in the meantime, Zafiris? I put my hand up and I don't think anybody else has, unless anyone's very eager in the last 6 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to ask my question, and maybe then, Zafiris, you might remember your point and others might. So I wanted just a couple of questions regarding regarding the whether your arguments changed by potential caveats, or if I may call them blind spots, which is the informal labor market. Yes, so a lot of the Arab countries rely heavily on informal workers that aren't registered or regulated anywhere, and for many of these it's actually a choice, and they are happier in surviving within the informal sector. So I just wanted to ask whether this influences your analysis in any way, and if so, how? And kind of slightly related to this, I was curious about your references to reproduction and sort of as if I think there's an idea of some kind of policy feedback there, and certainly the link between governance, accountability, and these structural issues that you're referring to, and would have liked just to know a little bit more about any kind of direct linkages that you can share with us more about particular policy decisions or maybe particular economic sectors. I know Ibrahim mentioned the agro industrial sector, but just a bit more of a sort of of a more detailed example there of how governance and accountability really are translated through employment policies would be helpful. So that was just from me. Thank you. Would anybody like to ask any more questions? So Zafiris does this final round before we end. Okay, so there's also a question from Raida. Go ahead, Raida.
Thank you very much, Zafiris, for an extremely enlightening lecture. Particularly your argument on women's unemployment rates. And my question, I have two questions, very short and simple. The first is, so ultimately, do you agree that young women, fresh graduates, unemployment rates, formal unemployment rates in the Arab world are among the highest in the region and globally? That's A. And B, alluding to your potential sort of solution for this, do you find that there's a role for leveraging technology? And specifically, do you have any areas that require focus on to ameliorate or to weaken the impact of the so-called sociocultural, transportation, infrastructure, etc. barriers against young women's unemployment rates, formal? And here I'm specifically focusing on formal employment. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Raida. So colleagues, we have just like 3 minutes left. If anyone wants to ask a last question to add to this, then please do so now. Otherwise, these will be the last set of questions for Zafiris. No. Okay. Over to you, Zafiris, please.
Yeah, thank you for these additional questions. And they are a little bit more focused compared to the macro ones we had before, which are more difficult to answer. First, informality. I mean, ILO discovered informality in 1973 on a study in Kenya. And since then, we are saying informality is high, 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 high. And I don't know what we have done for that. So informality is a real fact of how the labor markets work. And effectively, it's a failure of the price mechanism in the labor market. We're talking about quantities, employment, unemployment, ratios, and the like. But the issue here is, does the price mechanism work? And this is, we have a problem not only in the Arab region, but globally. Let me tell you something. I did a paper on UNESCO on how the COVID affected employment patterns, especially informality, because UNESCO is big in informal education. And guess what? I mean, you know it also. Okay, I did it at the beginning, so it was kind of an early finding. Informality has increased in the West with all this platform work and gig economy and all this kind of stuff. And what is the reason for that? It's the price mechanism. I mean, technology has changed the relative prices of inputs. And therefore, I mean, capital has become cheaper and more productive. Therefore, you use fewer workers. So there, you need to supplement the problems of the market with social policy. So don't expect the market to do the social policy. Let the market produce as much as it can, then tax it from the profits, not from the poor, because we know all taxation is almost regressive in all countries. And then do your social policy. And unfortunately, this model is still desirable. I remember 2008, after the crisis, of course, after the crisis, what is your first issue? How can I get back to normal? And what was the new word that came up with Joe Stiglitz? We'll get back to a new normal. What new normal? I mean, the financial markets are still creating havoc, and the economy and social outcomes have not improved since then. So we're dealing with a brutal kind of process of globalization and race to the bottom, and governments have not been able or are not willing to tackle that. So that's about informality. Now, coming specifically to the Rana, to your points of climate adaptation and the like. Yes, these are very important things. I know now the IMF has introduced in its debt sustainability analysis the implicit cost of climate adaptation. And this makes the debt less sustainable than the standard kind of calculations that it was using before. And of course, in the MENA region, we have a huge problem of water that the countries have yet to address. And this will create more pressure on debt sustainability. Now, on women and youth, and also Ryder's point on transportation and other things, let me tell you this. A lot of emphasis, I didn't touch this policy measure, other than active labor market policies, of childcare, that we have low rates of childcare, therefore women cannot work because they have to attend to children. Let me tell you this. Fertility in the Arab world has been reduced on average from 7 to 2.5. And yet, female participation rates are not increasing. Why is that? This is what Raghi Assad calls the MENA paradox. And it has kind of explanations. The jobs are not there, not because in number they're not there, the wages are very low. If you look at the international experience, when does female labor force participation increases? It increases after long periods of sustained growth. In Europe, which is a complete transition, and in America, as I showed you one graph. Female labor force participation started rising towards the end of what they call les 30 glorieuses, the 30 glorious years after the war, as the French say, which started in 1945 after the end of the war and finished in 1973 with the oil crisis. At that time, labor markets become very tight and wages start increasing. And this changed the relative price of staying at home vis-a-vis going to the labor market. And because the economies, European economies were increasing at about 4.5% per capita these years, the slack and the wealth that they were creating created all the incentives for women to join. And of course, this solution came with fantastic reduction in fertility from 2.5 on average to 1.6 today. And rise in female wages by the market. And then guess what? These changes resulted in changes in cultural norms and institutions. The Equal Pay Act in Europe and the Sex Discrimination Act for Employment, they were all introduced in the 1970s, after almost 30 years of persistent economic growth. So we don't have this tightness in the labor market in the Arab countries. And of course, when they start growing, the breadwinner and the one who will work will be the man. So culture appears as kind of a constraint to women's participation, but it has to be seen in context of the dynamics of family formation and intra-household education and supply decisions of the households. Now, let's not forget that the rates of return to education are the lowest in the Arab region. This is another very low kind of point of the Arab region. It doesn't pay to get educated. And you take it for credentialism, and in case, effectively, you are lucky to find a job in the public sector, which is shrinking, by the way, because of the debt. And we're going back to the macroeconomic management. And this goes to what Ryder said about women. Do we agree? Women have the highest unemployment rates compared to other regions. First, I agree to that, but I will add something else. Men have the highest unemployment rates. And when we say that women have the lowest rates of participation in the labor force, Arab men have the lowest rates. Let me give you just an example. The Arab countries with the lowest female labor force participation are Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine. And guess what? The participation rate of men in these three economies are the lowest in the Arab region. So effectively, if I can conclude, I'm saying that, let me conclude with another anecdote here. My grandfather was a surgeon, a very nice person. And he told me, if you ever fall sick, make sure the last person you visit, the last doctor, is a surgeon. He's well-intending, and he knows only one thing to make good, how to chop you up. It's what the English say, if you have a hammer, you see the world as a nail. So definitely we have to take a youth perspective, the women's perspective, and all this, every group's perspective, but we have to consider them as part of the society. And from the point of view of employment, the labor market does not care whether they will employ a youth or a woman or a man or an adult. The labor market needs bodies, and these bodies depend on their wages. So if there are wage differentials, then the labor market will employ some more than the others. And I cannot accept the low quality of education as an explanation for the Arab youth. Let me tell you this, I agree. The PEARLs, the TIMSS, the PISA results show that the learning outcomes of Arab students are very low. That's not an issue. This is a fact. And this is an academic fact. The real issue for the labor market is the skills and education that the young people bring into the labor market. Are they lower than what the labor market needs? No. The labor market needs effectively very low skilled and educated workers. That's why the rates of return are so low. Also, another fact for the region is the Arab firms train least than any other region. If you have a problem of skills, you train. And which are the countries that complain most about lack of skills? You'll be surprised to know they're all three Germanic. It's Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Why do they complain? I mean, these people have high productivity and high skills. They complain because the technology advances they have is so fast that the education system does not provide. Therefore, they have to roll up their sleeves and train their workers. That's why they have excellent training opportunities and practices for their workforce, and yet they complain they don't have skills. So you can see here that one fact may be subject to different explanations. And I think this is the point I'm trying to make, that yes, we have facts that we can agree. This is high, this is low. But when we come now to finding a causal effect and then policies, let's be careful. And a fact that we go to countries and we tell the ministers that look how much you use because you don't use women, and they don't take it up because it is an easy hanging fruit with very high returns, according to the estimate I mentioned from UN Women and IMF and others. It means that these people know something that we do not know or we do not want to acknowledge. So enough negativism. Let me stop here.
No, that's fine. And I think, yeah, just mindful of the time and that there'll be lots of feedback and comments that can continue offline. So if I may, thank you, everyone. I don't know that we can resolve all the issues, but let's keep working at them. I think I would just like to just quickly ask Ibrahim, because I know he texted earlier and has been waiting patiently to react very quickly. And I would just say, if Ibrahim, you could come in and give the feedback that you wanted to give before we close for the afternoon.
Thank you very much, Rana. I'm sorry to delay, but I just have one burning issue because I was following Zafiris, thinking for quite some time, and he famously said that the dominance of the empirical macroeconomic approach using labor market survey data might actually, shed light on the tree but miss the forest. So my question to him is that, does he see a promising research design to think about funnel labor market survey data across over time and across countries, and controlling for the kind of factors he's talking about, in the sense that we can actually arrange such a funnel that reflects different institutions, different political economy settings, the quality of education, and so on, to assess the marginal contribution of these factors, along with the micro issues that labor market economists usually. Do you think this might be a viable approach to consider? Thank you very much.
Okay, let me answer without waiting for Anna to give me the green light. Yes, I mean, the panel data are the holy grail in our profession. And in fact, it is through them eventually that whatever we were saying about female labor force participation in Europe and America in the 60s and 70s eventually kind of confirmed. And the thing is that cross-section studies at one period of time, right? I mean, they fudge a little bit the income and wage effect. On the one hand, women are pulled into the labor market because wages are higher. On the other hand, this is dampened because the economies become richer. Therefore, there is more income that women can have, and they take the back seat and stay at home if you want. And I have to say, we didn't nuance everything that I said, that for example, in some Arab countries, remittances are very high. So on the one hand, local wages are very low to attract the women into the labor market. On the other hand, their husbands of these families are in the Gulf and they say remittances, which means that their families can do well and there's no pressure. So let's not forget this, this aspect. It's a very complicated thing. Now, from my view, there is a weak link between microeconomics, macroeconomics, and development economics. We don't go from one to another in a linear way. So yes, microdata are very useful, and they are very useful for current analysis to assess impacts if you want and do simulations. But one has to know good macroeconomics, and then macroeconomics, which is today, if you want, right, analysis of the fiscal and the economic conditions today, but developing economics, which is dynamic and has to do with structural change, is a different thing. And I have to say there are very few of us who can link everything together, and worse, that if you are to link them, you need to write a book, because it's a long story. You see how many topics I covered, and they were kind of all over the place. While it's much easier to write an article and publish it on a specific issue. So that's it. Thank you, Ibrahim, for raising the issue. But ERF is doing a very good job with this kind of data, I have to admit. But we can elevate them a little bit, not so much to the macro, but to the development context. We have to take the kind of more institutional and developmental approach to when we analyze the results of micro studies.
Thank you, everyone. I'm afraid we ran out of time already, but again, we did say this would be a session to remember as well, but thank you very much. I think we will draw to a close. Really want to thank Zafiris for sharing your experiences and your generous responses, and thank you to everyone's engagement and questions. There was one more question from Amal, so we're going to redirect that by email to set you free now for this afternoon. And just thank you again. I hope these very important insights and experiences that you all have will feed into the corridors of power and policy, and I know that you all care about this as well. Hopefully we will meet again. You still have a chance to register for our conference in Morocco or come in person if you would like. So perhaps this might be another chance to talk again. Otherwise, just, yeah, thank you again, Zafiris and colleagues, and see you all again soon. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you for inviting me and listening to me. To be continued, inshallah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I think we normally stay online a bit, but yeah, feel free to leave anyone if you need to. And thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.